All right, we're live. Welcome to week 3. You want to start us off, Mariah? Or
Uh,
am I supposed to go first? I've forgotten.
well, you can start us off if you're feeling up for that.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I will. I will. I forgot about that. Yes, I have it in my notes. So, okay, so basically where I wanted to start was we're all feeling stuff and it's really intense, and I've gotten a few private messages and so on. So we're all in this space for grief, and I think it's excellent. Um, it's excellent space. It's excellent. Hi, Sarah. Oh, here we have. I think this is Shirley by phone. Um, uh, Sorry, letting people in got me sidetracked. It's no problem, no problem. It's me. It's my brain, not yours. Basically, we're all coming up against stuff, and I really appreciate the wisdom that Mariah had brought when we were setting this up, that we have now this space for grief work this week, and next week is a catch-up week. So for those who have had any fears on not finishing my reading, I didn't do it correctly or whatever, I didn't put my thoughts in the group yet. There's personal things going on, and of course, how can we not say there's world stuff going on too? So that is all causing a lot of impact on a lot of people, and I just want to be aware of that, and I want you to know, hey, it's okay if you're behind. You're just on time as far as I'm concerned. And there is time to catch up and finish and do all the things that you need to do. And I was supposed to be talking about Andrea Smith and Tema Okun. I did a little video this week. I don't know how little it is, but talking about the heaviness around the Islamophobia and how the media, right-wing media specifically, creates this scenario where it pushes the Overton window over to the right. So I kind of touched on Tema Okun's work in there, just tangentially. And then Andrea Smith's work of the 3 pillars, right? So these are the real ways that these are the mechanisms it's working by. And I think you already are bumping up against some of these in yourselves. I've gotten messages where of perfectionism, or I'm seeing people posting about like getting it right or urgency, or any of these things are pieces of this programming and how it maybe shows up for us. So I don't want to say more than that, but I want to, I could, but it feels like that's not where the energy is going. So I'm going to kind of allow that to be. But I do want to say something about the kind of trajectory we can expect in this work. It's not the kind of thing that is going to happen overnight. Even in this 12-week course, you're not going to have figured it out. So this is just the beginning seed. Okay, and I was reminded of that today. I met with one of the people I'm connected with, Star, and you can connect. You can see she's in my connections on Instagram and Facebook. And I like that because her name is Star and my name is Anuradha, which is one of the 27 stars in Vedic astrology. So there was some, kind of connection there. And we actually met 5 years ago in a marketing group in a high-end, one of these high-end business marketing thingies where they have law of attraction and spiritual bypass and kind of a very forceful approach to sales, going against objections and all of this. And this is the kind of context we met in. And we just happened to have a call today, a conversation this morning, and we were just reflecting on how far we had come in that time of detoxing from that program and the conditioning and the ways that we were being taught to manipulate in that program. What attracted us? Like, why would we be on a sort of place in our mind to think, hey, this is a good solution? And we've even both saw ads that same person is running now, and we both put angry faces on on the ads, and then we stopped getting the ads, you know. And there's still people in our circle who follow this person and still kind of subscribe to these ways of thinking. And I was telling my friend Star, hey, I've seen the trajectory you've been on unpacking white fragility, unpacking some of these elements. And I was just basically inviting her to keep going on this journey. I mean, she's a parent. She is, I don't think she runs a business anymore. She now is thinking of moving into education. So what I'm saying is 5 years, and we've come this far, that we're both having anti-capitalist conversations in the way we're doing things. Yep. So I want to make that really clear, that this 12-week thing is just the snapshot. And this day-to-day reality here of I'm reading this stuff and I'm getting my eyes opened, or whatever is happening, whatever is real for you, that's still part of the journey. So don't discount that, right? As they say, the way is just as important as the destination. So I want you to think of that each step is, hey, how can I, in the way I'm doing it now, can I unroot something? Not can I unroot it perfectly, not can I do every, because that kind of stops us from making that forward motion. It's by looking back, we see, oh my gosh, we no longer would subscribe to that kind of selling. We would use radical consent in every place possible. This is the kind of conversation we had. From 5 years ago, we weren't having that. So I just want to assure you, you are on the right thing. And part of that process, I don't know why teeth keep coming up to me, but just like that teeth, the brushing the teeth, it's the daily thing of I'm going to show up and take care of my teeth. That's the thing. And this is the grief practice too. It needs to be just as important as I'm going to eat and I'm going to get water and I'm going to brush my teeth or whatever it is going to do. And I struggle with brushing my teeth here. When on depressive days, I'll be honest, that's a hard one for me. And yet, as often as I can, am I doing that? And just like that, this grief practice needs to come into your, not just, when I feel like it. Now it's like the nonsense of prayers they say after all the shootings. Like, that's not doing anything. I'm not saying praying or any of that doesn't help, but if it's not brought into us every day, then we're not going to be able to handle the big things. It's just like a backlog, a deluge. So, I'm just asking, and I'm being present to what I'm seeing in this space. How can we start to do that? How can we do that? And over time, that deluge will now come into flow again, that we can be okay with it. And on that note, I'm going to give the mic over to Mariah.
Thanks. I love that you're talking about the deluge, because I think, one of my teachers in this grief work, Wendy Koss, who lives in Colorado, she talks about opening the faucet, and like as we're practicing grieving, we're opening the faucet a little more, and like what might have been like rusty, hard to open, dirty water, like it starts to flow more clear and more easily, so that as we're used to turning that faucet, like every time we open it, we can just have that full flow of water, have that full flow of grief. And so it's kind of priming ourselves, and this goes back to like this conditioning that, I think a few people spoke to it in the group of like this conditioning around like not feeling allowed to really like have all this pain and this baggage and this trauma, and being conditioned that we need to like just kind of get over it, or that it's our fault. Like, I think maybe Vina, you said that in the group, like, this years of conditioning that it's your fault, and like the mainstream psychology approach, right? That it's like all about the individual. Whereas now many of us are looking at that and we're saying, oh, actually so much of this is societal. And I said this in one of my comments, but like, I think the fact that the grief and rage are coming up for all of you, like, is a sign of true wellness. That is a sign of health. To be numb and to accept that the status quo of the system that we're seeing is like normal or is okay is actually, to me, a sign of not wellness. And so to be having these, whatever trauma and whatever disability or illness or things you may be struggling with in your daily lives, I know a lot of us are struggling with chronic things, like, I really just want to honor that, like, the fact that you're having these reactions is a sign of wellness and of truth and rightness in your body, and that knowing that you have. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about grief. I want to name it, feels a little odd. I really wish that we were all like outside or in a beautiful room with a wood stove where we could feed our prayers and grief into the fire, or, you know, it's a little bit odd to be translating this into the online world. And I think our group so far here is doing a pretty good job. I really appreciate everyone showing up, being vulnerable, and just doing the best we can to do this work in this like weird online workshop world that is so far from like any kind of Indigenous reality. And I'm glad that we're all showing up anyways and making it work. So I feel like we can figure it out together. So the resources this week, there's a couple of things from some of the people who I haven't learned directly from, but a lot of my friends have, and other teachers have studied with them. There's Martine Prachtel's talk on YouTube, Grief and Praise. It's about an hour long. I highly recommend it. I highly recommend listening to the whole thing. It's not anything to watch. You can just put on the audio and listen to it. And in there, he's really talking about, he's a person from New Mexico. He has some European and some Indigenous heritage, and he spent 20 plus years living with the Tsutuhil Maya in Lake Atitlan, Guatemala. And he's written several books and been charged with the task of sharing a number of their teachings. And he in this Grief and Praise really talks about how like they're two sides of the same coin. In order to be fully able to praise and love and be embodied in the world, we need to also be doing the grieving. And the other article that we've shared here, Saban Fusome, she's an amazing teacher who is now an ancestor herself. It's a brief article she wrote called Embracing Grief. She comes from the Dagara people in Burkina Faso, West Africa, and her former partner, they had separated, but her former partner, Maladoma Some, is also continuing to do work, write books, and give workshops and grief rituals, and they're really amazing. And my teacher, Wendy, has also trained with him. And so those are some of the people that I really look to. Also, Joanna Macy, who we'll be talking about a little bit more in the coming weeks, but she has given some really amazing frameworks for activists and people doing movement work to be able to process the stuff that's coming up in the course of that work. I just wanted to name those people. And then the other person is Francis Weller, and I'm going to go into his 5 Gates of Grief in a little bit. I posted a YouTube link in the resources, optional resources in the group, and he also has a book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, which is really wonderful. Yeah, you know, Sabanfu, when she was alive, I'm told by those who studied with her, she was always happy. Like, she was always really happy and full of joy and laughing, and people would ask her, like, why are you so happy? And she was like, I cry every day, every single day. That's why I'm happy the rest of the time. And she, you know, she was, when she came to the US for grad school and was living and working here, and really started to put together that people didn't know how to grieve. Like, she was like, at one point went home and saw her grandmother and said, like, yeah, it's really weird. All these people in the US, they have this thing called depression. And she'd never seen that before in in her tribe. And her grandmother was like, well, do they know how to grieve? And she was like, oh, right. And so she began bringing some of, with the blessing of the elders, bringing some of their teachings out into the world. And, I think with the reading from Caliban as well, we see the seeds of this, the threads of this that started. And I think someone alluded, I think it was Vina, I think it was you alluded in the group to this mind-body split that we often perceive. And that's addressed later in Caliban. I'll pull out some parts of that later on for all of you in the course, but this kind of Cartesian dualism that the mind and the body are totally separate. And even though I think a lot of us, none of us, I would probably say, believe that here in this group, the remnants of that are still alive in us because it's been foundational to a lot of these systems we're talking about, to capitalism and to exploiting people, to white supremacy, to seeing the split. It's actually this rise of starting to see the body as a machine. This was never a metaphor that was used previously. And we see with Descartes the rise of this metaphor as the body as machine. And, this has so many consequences in how we're taught to be and interact with the world. And a lot of us are really still working through that conditioning. So definitely be gentle with yourselves as you do that. I want to talk a little bit about just these 5 gates of grief, because when we talk about grief, like I think in a lot of the cultures that we're in, it can often be like, yeah, someone dies, you have grief. And that's the only case, that's the only context we talk about it. And there's actually so many other forms of grief. And also, I think, to me, like rage and upset and sadness and like depression, all of these things fall under the grief umbrella. Like if we have a grief umbrella, all of those things are under it and they're all part of the grief. So it's not just one thing, it can be all of those things. And and so I think it's, it's another kind of invisibilizing of the fact that we have so much to grieve, that we're only allowed to grieve if we like lose someone that is close to us, or like there's only certain cases where we're really like allowed culturally to truly grieve. And so Francis Weller, he's acknowledged that there are other gates, and other people have started coming up with some other gates, but he's identified these 5 kind of primary gates of grief. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about those. So the first gate of grief, so these are all kind of like, they're like doorways into the collective room of our grief. And it doesn't really matter which one you go in, they're all ways to begin to experience the grief that's stuck in our bodies and open that faucet so it can flow. So the first gate of grief is everything that we love, we will lose. And, this is just a basic fact of life. There's not really any exceptions to it. Either by those things, those beings, those relationships, those experiences going away or passing, or people dying, or species dying, or by ourselves dying eventually. And so to be able to say, like, that we dare to love in that knowledge that we will lose that. But there's tremendous grief in that. This is kind of the grief and praise, like it's 2 sides of that coin. Everything that we love, we will lose. And so the grief is wrapped up in the love there. Feel free to pop in with a chat, or there's the raise hand feature, or jump in if you have any questions or just something's hitting for you. I'm happy for people to jump in. The second gate of grief is the places that have not known love, the places inside of us that have not known love. So these are the parts of us that we have like shrouded up in shame and have become like kind of banished or sectioned off inside of us. And these parts that we don't feel like are worthy or don't feel like should be shown to anyone or don't feel like are valid. And because they're sectioned off like that, we're not able to fully grieve them a lot of times because we perceive those things as defective. So we like, it's an experience of loss, but we're not really allowing that part of ourselves to experience the grief. This one is, I think, very real for a lot of us. And I know it's something we're all working on in our own ways, but yeah, this, again, that split. So splitting off ourselves into the places that are worthy and not worthy. The third gate here is the sorrows of the world. And this, I think, is what we're all talking about this week, right? Like, this is, you know, it's so heavy, all of this stuff. And even the people that don't consciously, Anurada and I were just talking about this before you all got on. You know, like, I was saying I didn't sleep well last night, and she was like, it's concerning to me when even the people who, like, you know, have a good setup in life and are generally doing well and are emotionally healthy, like, you're still really affected. And I was like, and you have privilege. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I think everyone is affected, you know. And I was saying, I think even the people at the top of the power structure, they're not materially, like, they have the resources to not be materially affected in the same way, but they're still having anxiety and depression and, like, right, like, there's no way to kind of be alive at this time and get out, right? Even if you're totally unaware. I mean, these things are poison. The things we're talking about, white supremacy and capitalism and all the beliefs it's instilled in us, those are poisons inside of us. And there's no way of getting out of that if you're living on the planet at this time. Even the people living, you know, the people that are still living in their intact indigenous cultures are now seeing climate change. They're seeing, and have been seeing, many of them for centuries, you know, the encroachment of capitalism and colonialism and people coming and taking their resources and their land. And so there's really no one that's not affected by this. And I think it's so much, right? Like, we're all saying that as we're reading this material, like, it's so much, it's almost overwhelming, and it can cause us to shut down. And this is a lot of the grieving that I do personally. I mean, there is the personal grief that the other two that I gates, like, those are things that occur for me. But I think this sorrows of the world is something that and I know a lot of us are just walking with every day and holding every day. And, you know, in my grief practice, I'm really there's moments when it just hits me and I'm really trying to, like, let that out. So, like, really crying, like, I listen to Democracy Now! A lot for my news, and, like, I probably cry, like, almost every time, like, there's something that hits me, like, oh my God. And so just, you know, not allowing ourselves to be numb to that, not allowing it to just be more information, not allowing it to just be another shooting. And of course we can't take it all in. And I don't think, like, overconsumption of media is healthy or anything like that, but to really allow ourselves to feel that and allow it to flow through us. I think that's part of what it means to be a whole human being alive in this time, is that we're witnessing that sorrow of the loss and the war and the extinction and the, you know, the racism and everything that we're seeing now. Yeah. Any comments? Yeah, again, feel free to jump in. I'm just going to cover the last couple gates. So the fourth gate is what we expected and did not receive. And, you know, I think of this is really, like, I mean, it could be specific things in our lives that are disappointments, but I think at the core, it's more like we're born expecting a certain level of, like, community and being welcomed into the world and being connected to nature and, you know, all of these things that the absence of them is felt by us, even if we've not experienced them. Like our souls feel the absence of those things, because for thousands of years, those things in their own way have been innate to how we've lived, right? And so to not receive community, to not receive real nurturing, even regardless of our parents, you know, some of it might be about our childhood with our parents. For some of us, yes, some of us no, but you know, just to be born into these cultures where that nurturing isn't really foundational, it's not present, it's actually kind of stamped out. And you know, and I think about this too with the white supremacy, with the xenophobia, with the lack of inclusion, and like, you know, like I think there's like a basic expectation that we have inside of ourselves that we're going to be safe, and that we're going to be welcomed, and that we're going to be able to pursue our path in life, you know, even if that's not your reality, or even if it never has been, there's still a feeling in there that that is something that you deserve, and that that all people should have. So this, I mean, this to me feels like another really relevant one, in terms of capitalism, and in terms of all these systems, is like, you know, so many people are not receiving that. And we're trying to piece it back together, but there's such a grief in not even knowing how to do that from the beginning. And then the fifth gate here is the ancestral grief. And some of you in the group have spoken to this a little bit. This is, you know, the old grief that we're carrying in our bodies from the things our ancestors have experienced. And there's been so much trauma, you know, as we're reading now in the book, it's like whether our ancestors were people of color that were in places that were colonized, or whether they were, you know, so-called white people, European people. There was a lot of trauma, and there was a lot that they've all experienced. And, you know, the past 20, 25 years, and especially even now, and increasingly the field of epigenetics is showing, you know, scientifically how this is literally passed down, and we're literally experiencing changes in our DNA and in our bodies from the things that our ancestors went through. I think the other thing with this is like the loss of connection to our ancestors, because ancestor reverence and a practice of being in relationship with the ancestors is really, you know, most cultures had that pre-colonization and or pre-Christianity. I mean, Christianity and the rise of, you know, monotheistic religions in general, there has been, you know, even pre-capitalism, a definite stamping out of the ancestor reverence and worship and relationship practices. So that's been long and ongoing in many places, but we see this all over the world, this knowledge that the ancestors are still there. They're just in a different realm, and they're just as real as us, and there's a relationship that can happen there. And so there's been a brokenness of that relationship now for many generations in many of our cases, and there's that grief because of that. And a lot of times we have to come to even having the language for that, right? Like we might not even be able to name that grief a couple of years ago, or like it's kind of new to our awareness. Like, oh, okay, this is another reason why I might be feeling this way. I want to speak a little bit more to the ancestral piece before we move into doing something a little bit more embodied, because the ancestor work has been really foundational for me in the past couple of years in terms of so many things, both like addressing my trauma and things that I hadn't been able to figure out, things that felt like traumas that weren't things that had happened to me in this lifetime. I've and I'm happy to talk about that some other time or write about it. It's a long story, so I won't go into it here. And I know a lot of us have had inklings of those things as well. So in terms of addressing the trauma, in terms of feeling like I can have a spiritual practice that is not appropriative and that it's embodied, and that is like really based in something, something older, and that I belong to, like a sense of belonging. And it's still, I feel like a total newbie at it still, like I'm still figuring it out. But I think it's been really important there. And then just this larger, and my teacher, Daniel Four, some of you might be familiar with, he's kind of doing a lot of ancestor work, and he is a white dude, but he wrote a pretty good book called Ancestral Medicine, and it's really kind of talking about the cultural tending that we can do when we're well with our people, the people behind us. If we can become well with our people and they become well, we can do a greater level of tending to the earth and the difficulties of our times. Just a lot more becomes possible that we weren't aware of being really possible for us before, when we can heal those behind us. And that brings me to another point that I feel is really important. Daniel talks about this, Martine Prachtel talks about this, a lot of other teachers talk about this, the ancestors who are well versus those who are unwell. And in the work, a lot of us tend to think about like our ancestors. Once we start thinking about it, we start thinking about the trauma, right? And we start thinking about all the trauma that's happened. And we're not usually reaching back more than a couple generations beyond remembered names in a lot of our cases. It's like we talk about ancestors and we start talking about our grandparents and our great-grandparents. And our line of ancestors, there are many lines of ancestors we have, right, that are actually reaching back like thousands of years, back to the place where we have many common ancestors, in fact. And when we're doing this work, it can be really tempting to, again, be kind of waiting in the trauma part of it. And the teachers that I've worked with are really encouraging us to establish relationships with the well ancestors. This is super important. And it requires a level of kind of trust and leaping and faith a little bit, because it's, again, often before remembered names. It's working in the spiritual realm, which we may or may not feel comfortable with, but really asking those well ancestors to come in and be the ones who are assisting us, who are surrounding us, and really forming strong boundaries with the ones who are unwell, who can kind of come into our bodies. And Martine Prachtel actually talks about this. He talks about ancestral ghosts and the importance of grieving the dead. And you think about a lot of cultures and like the practices of grieving the dead that we've lost. And those practices aren't just for us. They're also to help the ones who have died be able to reach the ancestors in a good way. And when we aren't able to grieve them, or when that practice is lost, then a lot of times, those energies or imprints or souls, whatever you want to call it, we could go into the semantics of it, but can really attach to those of us who are still living. And so forming strong boundaries where, like, when we start working with ancestral trauma, that we're not just saying like, hey, I'm an open vessel and all of the traumatized ancestors can come in. And especially because a lot of us are the only person in our family line doing this work, right? So you're especially vulnerable. If you're the only one doing this, they're going to be attracted to you. And this isn't to like scare you or whatever, but just like we have to have, healthy sense of self and boundaries with other people. That is true in the relationship with the ancestors too, because the ancestral work, it's not inner work. they're separate beings from us, and they are connected to us. And in fact, the farther back you go, they tend to function as kind of like a unit of well ancestral energy. My friend calls it the orb of ancestors. I was describing to her one time. She's like, "Oh, you have like an orb of ancestors." Like, yeah, okay. So I think it's really important to make that distinction, just because I see a lot of folks diving into this work and doing the caretaking thing that a lot of us that have been socialized female do. Like, we're like, "Oh yeah, come in, like we're gonna take care of you and we're gonna deal with this trauma, and then we actually invite more of that in that we're not prepared to deal with on top of what we already have going on." So yeah, I'm happy to give some more resources for that in the group, or like answer any questions about any of that now or in the future. I mean, I could do like a whole separate call just about the ancestral stuff, and I would be happy to do that actually if that's feeling really potent for people. I'd be happy to add like a bonus call where we just talk about the ancestral stuff. It feels really important to all of this work that we're doing. It feels like a really important piece to me. And so, yeah, I won't go too much into it, but I really would encourage you to start inviting relationships with your well ancestors in whatever way that feels authentic to you. And I can give some ideas in the group about how to do that as well. It doesn't all have to be like super woo-woo if you're more of like a grounded, like earth person. There's a lot of ways to engage there too. It's really something that I think everyone can find a way to connect. So I just talked at you all a lot. Does anyone have any questions? Do you want to pop into, oh, thanks Anuradha for popping those gates into the chat box. If you have any questions or comments or anything you want to pop into the chat box, or you can take yourself off mute and speak. I'll give a minute for that before we move into the next piece.
It seems like there's a consensus around having that call, so that's excellent. And Sarah's asked a question. I would like to know about grief altars, please. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's the next part of what we're getting into.
Yes, absolutely.
So before we make that jump, is there anybody who wants to share something about ancestors, about these 5 gates, about something that's come up during what Mariah was talking about? Anything like that? Embodied question, so on. Like for me, I had the experience when you're talking about it, because for me, oftentimes this part gets sealed off for me from previous ancestors. So it's really hard for me to speak in any way when I'm like that. And a lot of energy coming through here. In fact, pain behind this eye. So, and then something else of my well ancestors said something too about food and cooking. So that's what was coming up for me. And I know you and I have talked about connecting with the ancestors around my dance. So, privately. So, does anybody have anything like that? Anything similar they want to share? Something about how these gates are taken? One of the pieces around the gates that came up for me very strongly was our queer and trans ancestors and the silencing of them over the years, especially since colonization. I mean, as much as I love Sylvia's book, that's a gaping hole in the analysis that I find really a little upsetting, considering what's happening now, in that we're still seeing that resurgence. I mean, I'm from Arizona and I saw a gay man being beaten up by a group of people, and it's like, so it's still here, prevalent right now. And to me, that's I don't know what gate that falls under. Actually, I was thinking about that a little bit, maybe under Sorrows of the World and what we expected and did not receive around that one, like that we should have a place where we don't have to fit into some gender binary.
Yeah.
so on, and expected gender roles, like you were talking about, socialized to be certain ways. So those are places.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I actually want to speak to that briefly because Rain Crow, who is a teacher of mine who I've studied Caliban and the Witch with actually quite a bit. She's an amazing pagan teacher from the West Coast. And she was able to meet Sylvia Federici because she, was asking Sylvia, like, I'm using your book in this course. And she brought up that point, and Sylvia said, she's a cis woman. She wrote this book in 2004, and she said, like, if she were to do it again, she might have used different terms, like feminized people or feminized labor, because it was the construction of these binaries that were essential to that. And I think there are a lot of people that have, that are pointing that out now, not just in relation to her work, but that the constructing of difference was also the construction of the gender binary, which she's alluding to, but was also literally erasing the trans people, two-spirit people, whatever they called themselves in their traditions. And someone who's doing amazing work around this is Pavani Moray. Maybe some of you are familiar with P. Pavani's pronouns are P. And P has a podcast called Bespoken Bones. I'll put it in the chat. And Pavani does what P refers to as transcestral healing. And this is just really awesome. And so I definitely recommend that podcast. There's some really good stuff in there. And there are a couple of episodes specifically about queer and trans ancestors. And, the ancestral work, it can seem very, because we're talking about like our lines of grandmothers and grandfathers, it can seem very gender binary. But, even when I'm working with a very specific line, it's like, technically I'm talking about like the line of sperm behind my father and the line of eggs behind my mother. I mean, technically I don't actually know anything about the gender identity of most of my ancestors. And I have had a couple come through who are very clearly gender queer or trans. And so they exist and they're there. And thank you for speaking to that.
Absolutely. And Sarah said something here, interesting connection. I also had a pain behind one eye while Mariah was speaking on ancestral grief. I hope it's okay to use the chat box. Absolutely. I encourage it. And I cannot speak around baby in the house. Okay, well, that's good. We don't want to wake up the baby. Do you know why that happens? Why both of us are feeling a pain behind the eye? Do you understand why that happened, Mariah?
I don't, I won't speak to diagnosing the specifics of like what that, there's like lots of different systems for like why things happen in different areas of the body and what that means. But I do think that, I do think that it's common that it is living in the body. And so a lot of times, especially like because we don't spend a lot of focus on this, like I think that the ancestors are really hungry for relationship with us. And a lot of these things in our bodies and in our lines are like really eager to be seen and to be related with. And so like even just hearing about them, I think it's very common to have body pains and sensations and weird energetic things and like things just popping up because they're like, oh my God, someone's paying attention. Like, yes, this, pay attention to this. So definitely pay attention to those things. I mean, you can keep a journal about them. I would recommend doing some boundary work, even just, doing like a basic grounding exercise where you bring energy. We did it on one of the previous calls. You bring energy up from the earth and then you can let it come out the crown of your head and kind of form a shield over your body. And it doesn't have to be a hard shield. It can be like a living shield where things can get in and also other things don't come in. So you can do some energetic boundary work like that, casting bubbles of protection around yourself. I know Anuradha, we had talked about like plants, right? Like using plants and, sometimes like you had a specific plant, I think. I don't want to share too much of your personal experience.
Yes, absolutely. But I've used different plants, definitely, like since I grew up in Arizona. I have affinity with the saguaro cactus, so I've used that. I've used jasmine. I've used so a number of flowers or plant energies can be used here this way
Yeah.
too. I mean,
Good.
some people will say, here, I don't want to misappropriate spirit animal necessarily, but animals can provide protection as well. I frequently have animals visit in my dreams telling me certain medicine things. So, you know, here, you can be as creative as you would like to be with how you have the connection, how they might speak to you, how you might receive it, and how you might create boundaries to protect yourself especially from the unwell ones,
Yeah.
unwell ancestors, or any of this grief stuff, right?
Well, yeah, and I actually want to say one more thing about that with the unwell ancestors. I think I know a thing that's come up a lot for people that I work with around this is like, I don't want to be outcasting them. Like they're already so traumatized. I don't want to be like outcasting them. And to realize you're not outcasting them, you're actually directing them towards the well ancestors who are the ones who can help them much more than you can help them. So, I mean, it's instead of thinking of it like, you know, I have some people where they're like, oh my God, I have that boundary. And then they're all outside there and they're really sad. And like, okay, well, if you can see on the other side of that, that there's the well ancestors there and you're asking them to turn towards those ancestors who can help, who are also their own ancestors who can really help them become more well. That is, that's one way to think about that. That you're actually helping them. Also, you're not just exiling them with nowhere to go. Yeah. Yeah, let's speak a little bit about grief altars because that moves into the next thing. So, again, quoting Saban Fu, that, you know, taking the daily grieving is like taking out the trash or taking out the compost. And a lot of times when we're supporting each other or we're complaining or we're like whatever, we're kind of passing the trash can back and forth. Like we're like, I am coming with this thing and now I gave it to you and now I feel better, but you have it actually. And so we really don't want to do that. That's not going to help any of us. So really creating a place for that grief to go. And a grief altar or a grief shrine can be a place for that. And you can have multiple of these. I have one, well, I have on my altar indoors, I keep always a bowl of water. And this is the most basic practice that you can do is a bowl of water. If you like, you can put a little salt in it. If like salt water is something that you relate to, an entity that you relate to. I know we have one person, Sarah here, who's out on the salt water a lot. Has quite a relationship to the ocean. So yeah, the salt, water and salt are both known for their ability to hold and cleanse grief. So I keep a small bowl of water on the altar. I sometimes empty it every day, or sometimes like when, like if I've grieved a lot or if I've had a difficult day or if something difficult has come up, then I will replenish it. And I usually ask where the water wants to go. Sometimes I put it outside. Often I put it outside. Occasionally my houseplants will want it, but they don't always. So talking about this radical consent, where like we're starting to actually ask and feel into like, where does this want to go? And, you know, just trust yourself. If you have like just an inkling of a feeling like, I think I should take it outside, just trust that and go with it. You can have a specific spot. I also have an outside area. Well, up in the woods, there's one particular tree that's the oldest tree, oak on the land where I live, who has sort of agreed to be a holding place for a lot of the grief that I have. And so those are places that I'll bring the grief. Ritually, you want to just be moving this. So you want to be like moving the water, you know, like taking it outside or putting it in your plants or whatever regularly. If you've done a lot of grieving, you can also just take a shower. You can also put like salt in your hair. Just like put a little salt on your head and your hair, and like just a little salt on your body can really help. And then taking a shower is also great, or a bath. The water really does help. And if you've had a really heavy day, even washing your clothes, like not re-wearing those clothes, but actually washing the clothes before you wear them again. And some of the bigger grief rituals that I've been to, this is a recommendation where you've been in a room with a lot of people that are grieving, it's recommended to wash your clothes after. These are kind of basic ritual hygiene things that we can do. Your grief shrine or altar, you can also put, some people like to also have an ancestor shrine or altar, which can be connected or can be separate. Again, I would caution with putting pictures of the ancestors. It can be really good. And also if we're putting the unwell ones, the ones who we know, our grandparents and great grandparents, and their photos there, even our parents, if they've passed, you just want to check in and tune in and see, does that person feel like a supportive presence to you? What was your relationship in life? What do you know about how they're doing now? And do you get a kind of intuitive hit or sense? And if they're not well, maybe don't have them there now, and be working on the deeper ancestral healing before you bring them in, because you want it to be a place that can be really supportive to you. And let's see, was I going to say something else about this? I think you can work with the different elements in ways that you relate to. So if you really relate to the water, then be working with the water. I mean, the ocean is an amazing place to bring your grief, and really holds so much of that for us. The earth as well. Again, like I think I said this in the group, but it's like our grief can actually be nourishing, no matter how ugly or horrible it feels or bad it seems. Like if we put it in the right place, like I'd like to think of it like compost versus trash. If we put it in the right place, it can like really compost and become really kind of nutritive and life-giving, and something that we need and is part of the cycle. And so there's ways that we can feed the elements in the natural world with our grief, especially if we're asking that consent and just like thanking them, like, thank you ocean, thank you earth, thank you water. Fire is another one that if you work with fire at all, to sometimes like you can have a fire that's specifically for the purpose of eating your grief, and you could even like take like sticks or other burnable natural beings, and ask them to hold that grief for you, and then burn that grief in the fire. I'm kind of oversimplifying here, but this is a ritual that you could do and make your own. And these are, again, these are technologies that a lot of Indigenous people have used in their own way and are still using. And also, like, I think, all of us, we all live on this earth. We all can have a relationship to the elements, and all of our ancestors have worked with all of these elements. So it's something where I feel like we all have the kind of innate permission to be working with these elements to really hold and process our grief. I often find too, like if someone is, if someone's grieving, I often put a little bowl of water when I teach my yoga class. Like I'll put a little bowl of water on the altar and empty it after. So you can do this, and if you're doing any like workshops or group gatherings, or if you're just with a friend and there's like a lot of grief that they're having come up, you can just get a little bowl of water and empty it together afterwards. So you can kind of employ these technologies, ritual technologies in the moment too, as you need to. And then it can help to do some cleansing afterwards, not only of yourself, but of the space. So you can do smoke cleansing. I use mugwort and cedar especially, but whatever herbs or plants are indigenous to you. and are part of your lineage or part of your local habitat. There's been quite a conversation recently around white sage and Palo Santo and some of these things that have been really over harvested and commodified. And so just if you haven't done that research, doing a little bit of research about what kind of technologies your ancestors might have used or do use for purifying. Like I know in India, they also use camphor is a big one, and incense. Yeah.
I kind of like playing with the elements that you can bring, like you said, water and fire, where you can work with steam. So that could be a bath or shower. Like this is a way we can start to blend how these are. I kind of think smoke is earth, like from incense or something. That's earth and air. So we can play with these energies in more than one way too. Also, I wanted to say a couple things, if you don't mind, about the altars.
Yeah, go for it.
That we want to have this practice as much as possible of making an offering on whatever altar we're using. It's not, you don't like I made a joke on the first class before I hit record, before I let everybody in, to Mariah, that, oh, maybe someone will bring me an apple, because I used to be a teacher and they'd say, like, teacher, bring the apples for the teacher. One student actually did that, my years in the classroom. But it's the same kind of thing. You go see an important person, or, you're visiting somebody or whatever, same thing. These are your ancestors or whatever, earth spirits or whatever you're working with. Make some sort of offering, and it doesn't need to be big. In our culture, what you might eat later, you accept that as prasad. So you put that on the altar, and then you maybe eat it later. So it could be a piece of fruit, or we use the patika bellum. I don't know what that translates to in English, but like a rock candy. It's made of sugar and it's crystallized. So you could do something like that. I mean, whatever. It doesn't need to be fancy, but that's part of this offering. Like before you take something, you want to offer something. And then keeping the altar area clean. This is part of like the brushing teeth thing. This is part of it too. It's some regular interval. And then the other thing is bringing intentionality. And also you can work with the cycles of the moon. We're about ready. Like we started right before the new moon and we're almost hitting the full moon. It's a great time at this point in the cycle, whatever seeds we planted 2 weeks ago or so, now we can, review those potentially, and we can release, because the full moon gives us space to reflect, to light, it lights our way, and we can say, I don't need these things. And so there is a tendency to release that's available to us too. So, and different planets also have different energy, right? Like I'm a Sagittarian, so there's fire energy. I mean, so we can work with these elements in different ways, you know what I mean, to bring these kinds of things, different phases of the moon, different energies going on with the planets, or what's going on in our planet, right? So you can work with these, as Mariah always tells me, work with what we have. It's just like be resourceful of what's available to us. We don't need to go invent something. It's probably right there. So I wanted to say that. And do you have anything else to add about altars, Mariah? Or does anybody have questions about altars?
Yeah, just feel free to type your questions or jump in if you have that. I mean, there's so much more I could say about altars. I'm really glad you brought in the idea of feeding. I've been feeding my ancestors daily, my well ancestors daily, sometimes multiple times a day for about 18 months now. It's made a huge difference in my life. I usually leave a small amount of, like, on a tiny plate of whatever meal I'm eating, and I put it on the altar, and then I take it out and leave it outside after I live in a place where I can do that. I know some of you are in urban areas or whatever. Although you would be surprised, I don't leave chocolate and things like that, because I have dogs and I know it's not good for them. So if it's something I think is going to be really damaging to the wild animals or my canine friends, I try not to offer that thing, because they're kind of the stand-in. My one dog, I joke, he like knows what it means to visit the ancestors now because I have the one tree where I always leave the offerings, and he's like excited to go there with me. But so, whoever takes the offering, that's fine. But I was in New York City, up in Harlem, in predominantly Dominican neighborhood where my friend lives, and I did a spirit plate, and we call it a spirit plate often, and took it outside, and I was leaving it by a tree on the block, and I just tuned in for a second, and I was like, oh my God, the spirits are so alive here. And I figured that people were having ancestral spiritual practices in those few blocks because I could feel it. I was surprised. I didn't expect it to be that strong in New York City, but I was like, okay, there's people doing some kind of magic and tending here because it's alive. So, whatever feels right for your ecological area and your practice to do, but that feeding, because it is a two-way relationship, right? Like it's like, I think the new age, like spirituality, like condenses everything into like, we're all one and it's all the same. And like, I think there is a fundamental oneness and connectedness to all of life. Like I absolutely believe that. And that kind of collapse, Daniel 4 has pointed out that that's like another product of like colonization of like kind of like colonizing the ancestors or the spiritual entities into us. And like, oh, it's just all my experience. And it's like, we are experiencing it the way you do, but they're actually their own separate entities with their own kind of agency. And so, it's like you wouldn't forget to feed your child. You wouldn't forget to give a plate to your grandmother. She lived with you, right? Like, it's bringing this into your daily life in a way. And you can also, some people also are making offerings for the nature spirits and land beings where you live, which even in an urban area, I know Anurada and I have talked about this, where we've been, sometimes the energetic work we've been doing, I'm like, okay, where are the green spaces around you? Like, where are the nature beings? And who are they? You live in London, but they're somewhere. And so we've, she's told me about the places where they might be. And so we can start to build relationships with all of these beings. And just like any relationship, if we're asking something, we also want to be giving something. It's that reciprocity. And sometimes as you get deeper into this work, they might start to ask things of you, and remember that you don't have to do those things. You can always say no. You're still full consent and agency too. You don't just have to do everything they tell you, because once you tune in, especially like I alluded to earlier, if you're the one in your family that's doing all this, or if you're the one person on your block or in your section of town that's like doing this tending, it's going to be like, oh, here's someone that's paying attention. Like there's a lot of work to do. Let's give them a lot of work. Right. And so you get to decide how much of that work you take on, just like any other relationship. You get to engage in that, and you get to negotiate, and you don't have to just do everything. You just remember that. There's always the reciprocity, and there's always the negotiation that you get to have there.
Thank you for saying that part, Mariah. That's really important, I think. I know people who have gifts of talking to the undead in some, or the people who have not crossed over, whatever, and they've had to create boundaries because every single dead person in that area comes and speaks to them, and it's like, or the people who need help crossing over is essentially the unwell ancestors of other people, right? Then they know this is a channel. So. And I want to say something too about us relating to each other as living beings. This is a great opportunity for you to practice setting your own boundaries of what you need, your own capacity. I can handle this, but I can't handle that. I need this, or whatever, being really clear. Even over this weekend, once the thing happened in New Zealand and I woke up Friday, I could not take any more. I was at an incredible over limit. And Mariah and I have a relationship where I can say, I need to step away because at this point I can't take anymore. And so I spent different days doing different things, but Friday primarily chanting and doing a lot of clearing work, because to me, I there was so much more to compost than usual. So I had to do that. I felt a little bit more human as I went through the weekend, spending time in nature, spending time laughing with my family. So do that. So this is how we would practice and communicate what we need. Here's a great opportunity, even in this space. Don't feel like you have to comment on every post. Don't feel like you have to say something to everything. Don't think you have to invent something cool to say. You know, it's not necessary. Do what's in your thing, and do that unapologetically. There's no need to apologize. Right? Mariah said, I've got you for the weekend, and then I'm going to need you to look in on Monday. So we can have this kind of relationship. And that doesn't happen. Like, I've known Mariah for a year. We've been meeting at this time for over a year. So we have that relationship. Same thing with our ancestors or these altars or other people in our circle, the people in our space. It takes time to develop that and to know, but we want to trust ourselves that we know what we need, and we know what we have capacity for, and we also believe the other people and knowing they're doing right, from the 4 agreements. Like what are the assumptions we're making? We know that people are doing their best, right? These are the kind of thoughts we want to be having, not to say if you don't have them, that's wrong, but I'm just saying that's the operation. That's the way I'm operating in this space. And I know we're all finding our way of how can we operate in the world relationally, not transactionally. So these are places for us to, as we go from ancestor work and people work, we're allowed to have these kinds of things. We're allowed to do all of these things are regular practice in our relationship. And we almost have to learn how to re-relate, because the ways I was taught how to relate in a lot of ways, or what we watch, what's on TV or whatnot, that's not the way we want to be operating by and large. So it's okay if we are not perfect in that. So that's the part I wanted to add in this.
Thank you. We're a little over as usual, not conforming to the capitalist time structure. I just want to thank you for staying. And so do some kind of a grief practice. And if there was anything new we talked about today, incorporate that. You can listen to the Martine Prachtel talk if you like. You can contemplate on the 5 gates of grief. You can set up a grief shrine. You can find a spot outside to go. Do some kind of a grief practice on your own, or multiple grief practices. Felt like that would be better to just talk about it today and then give you the chance to go off on your own. Again, like I said, if we were all together somewhere, I would have us do a ritual together. But I think just to be able to really be connected and give yourself all the time that you need and not feel that pressure, just carve out some time for yourself to do that as you can. And any questions or things that come up, feel free to ask in the group. And if there's anything that feels pretty private, again, you're welcome to message either of us. If there's something private you want to share, we're there for that too. And yeah, let us know how it goes. And again, next week we have kind of open question and answer. So anything that comes up for you, anything that's come up for you so far, the reading, the grief practice, ancestor work, any of this other stuff, the white supremacy stuff, we could talk about that. We can also just talk, but we'd love to be talking with you all if you have questions, or and if you want to submit questions, you could private message us either questions if you have questions that you want to submit, and if you want them to be anonymous, we can answer those too. So we're just going to give that spaciousness, and I know we went really heavy the first couple weeks, so we're going to give that spaciousness to continue with that next week and catch up. And I wish you all the very best. Still feeling super happy and honored to be here with all of you and the way you're all showing up, and big love out to everyone.
That's possible. Thank you.